Signs and symptoms. I've got a little chart here just so that I can read them off, and then we'll go through each one and we'll have a discussion about them. So the first one is difficulty controlling emotions. The reason why this happens is because as a person who suffers from CPTSD, what your brain does is it doesn't process the emotions around the situation because the emotions around the situation were too overwhelming for you to be able to deal with and still, let's be honest, stay sane and stay safe. You need to understand that that was important at that time, but now it's unhelpful. Now it affects your day-to-day life. Those emotions that you didn't process when you had the trauma, they're still in your body, they're still in your mind. They haven't gone. They've not been processed. They're just stuck and they fester. It's okay to be emotionally dysregulated when you're suffering from something like trauma, but it's also important to understand that that is something that you need to address. One of the biggest ways that you can address that is through learning about emotions, what emotions are, what they do for you, how to process them, and then make sure that you are getting in touch with your emotions and you're processing your emotions. But make sure that you're doing that in a safe environment with a professional who is trauma informed and can help guide you through that process, because feeling the emotions of the traumatic situation to process them can be traumatic in itself. And it's important to make sure that that doesn't happen. Therefore, you need to be doing this with somebody who is experienced. However, the psychoeducation you can do on your own through reading books, watching YouTube episodes. There are a lot of really good content creators out there who talk about emotions, and there's a lot of research out there as well if that's what you like to look at. And that's one of the biggest things I had to learn. Emotionally, I was like a baby, floundering, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to process my emotions, having no guidance on it, because the people who needed to give me guidance in that situation just weren't able to do it. I have to learn it from scratch. I'm not blaming those people. I'm just stating the facts. It's important to acknowledge that this is something you're going to have to learn and work on. And that's okay. Even now, I still work on it 2 years into my recovery. I work really hard on understanding emotions and not logicalizing my emotions or disassociating from them, but really sitting in the emotion when I feel it, allowing myself to just be, to just feel. That is really hard even now, but it's a lot easier than it used to be because I understand more about emotions and I understand the importance of those emotions. And so I know that this needs to happen and therefore I do it. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles with recovery is not understanding the importance of the things that you need to be doing to look after yourself and manage your condition. Once you understand the reason behind why you need to be doing what you're doing, it's a lot easier to motivate yourself to do it. It's not easy, but it gets easier. The next one is preoccupation with an abuser. What this means is you're so focused on the person who abused you, how they're feeling, what they did, blaming them, trying to understand them, maybe trying to pacify them still, wanting their love and attention, and seeking to understand. It's difficult to acknowledge that you are being abused or have been abused, because when you do that, it makes the person accountable for their actions. If you acknowledge that they're accountable for their actions, you then can't hold on to the shame that you have been holding on to for most of your life. Even though shame is damaging, in a way it's comforting for a person with CPTSD because that's what you've had most of your life. It's been your friend. It's not been a good friend, but it's been your friend throughout your life. It's scary to acknowledge that the shame is not yours. Sometimes that can be really hard, especially if the person is a parental figure. And you will go through a grieving process when you acknowledge it. You'll grieve the person they could have been. You'll grieve how things could have been for you if things had been different, if they'd been different, if other people had noticed and protected you. And you'll have lots of questions. Why didn't people protect me? Why didn't they listen to me when I told them these things? Why did they just dismiss what I said? Because I'm a child and I'm just trying to get attention. Why didn't the adults do what they were supposed to do? It can be really hard to come to terms with that. A lot of times we get very preoccupied with our abuser. That also helps us to put the focus on someone else rather than focusing inside us and seeing this traumatized, damaged person. Once you understand that you're traumatized and damaged, you then actually have to do something about it. And that's really, really scary. And so sometimes it's easier to focus on another person and try and put the pressure on the other person to change, because then your situation would change. But the truth is that the only way your situation is going to change is if you change. You acknowledge how you feel. You see yourself for the traumatized person that you are. You acknowledge that you were traumatized and you acknowledge that it did damage, that it has shaped you as a human being, that there's a lot of work ahead for you to undo that damage. That is your responsibility to yourself. Nobody else can do that for you. You have to do it. Other people can support you in the process, definitely, but you are the person that has to do the work. And that can be really scary. Number 3, negative self-view. This is where you've turned the blame inwards. When we are children, we are reliant on our caregivers to keep us safe. So when we are traumatized, we cannot acknowledge that the people who were responsible for us weren't able to keep us safe, because that means that we will be in danger constantly, and our brain just can't cope with that. Then it thinks, well, it can't be the adults. They're looking after me. They're keeping me safe. The blame must fall on me. It must be my fault that I am being abused. It is my fault that my parent is hitting me. It's my fault that my parent says they hate me. It's my fault because I'm not quiet enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. And so if I am quiet or good enough or smart enough, then that will improve my situation and I will be safer. And of course, that does a lot of damage. It does a massive amount of damage to us and our self-esteem. It's really hard. Next one, the 4th one, is difficulty with relationships. When you come from a traumatized background, because you have a very low self-esteem, you are always reacting to situations from a danger perspective. You are not emotionally regulated because you're not processing your emotions. You're just shoving them down. You're disassociating from the situation. It means that when you have relationships with people, they don't go very well. They're unhealthy relationships. You might do things like become a fawner and fawn over the people around you, which for them is very beneficial, but for you, it means that you're neglecting yourself for others, and that has consequences. You're not acknowledging your own needs or wants. When you live your life as a traumatized person, not caring about your own needs or wants, putting everybody else first, that has a negative impact on your relationships, because it becomes this dynamic of you always giving and people take, because you never ask for them to give. And so they think you don't need any, and therefore they don't give you any support. Especially if they've traumatized themselves, they might not be able to give you or understand when you need support. And that can cause a lot of resentment from you, because you're giving all the time to this person. They're just taking. But when you need help, they're just not doing anything for you. And that can really be hard to come to terms with. It's not that the person is necessarily doing that on purpose. It's because of the way that you're interacting with them. You are not expressing your needs. And so they won't know that you have needs unless you express them. We have a lot of expectation on people, but very rarely do we actually say what we need from people. Over time, this resentment grows, and eventually it results in the breakdown of the relationship, whether it's a friendship, a romantic relationship, or both, or whether it's a relationship with family members. Sometimes you might avoid relationships completely as a result of trauma. And that's pretty much what I've done. I've not had romantic relationships because I always used to think, well, people just take from me and nobody gives me support that I need. If I have another person that is relying on me in the same way, it's going to burn me out and it's going to be work. It's not going to be pleasant work. And I'm just can't do it. I don't have the energy to do that because I'm putting all my energy in all the other relationships that I have where I'm just constantly giving to those people and they're constantly taking, but they're not giving back. And so I'm just not going to have a relationship. We never really consider the fact that we might actually have a relationship with somebody who will support us, who will actually show us what a healthy relationship is. And that might change our relationships with others. So it's quite tricky. And it's very important to not blame yourself in these situations. This is just the way that you have perceived relationships as a result of your trauma. This is what your brain thinks needs to be done in order for people to want to be around you to keep you safe. Because as long as people want to be around you, you will be safe. You fear confrontation because if you have confrontation with people, then you think that they're going to abandon you. You think that they're not going to want to be around you anymore. And that is terrifying. You just do what everybody wants you to do. You are what everybody wants you to be. And you never confront people about anything. You never express your needs. You just are a human surviving, not a human being. That's no way to live. It's important to acknowledge that, yes, relationships are important, but sometimes they can be toxic and sometimes they'll need to end. And that doesn't mean that you are a bad person or that person is a bad person. It just means that the two of you are looking for different things in life. And that's okay because you can find other people who will contribute as much to the relationship as you do, who will listen to your needs and support you when you need to be supported. And when you have that, it's pretty amazing. The next one, symptom number 5, hopelessness. This is a really hard one. When you're not being authentically yourself and you're constantly giving everything that you have to other people, they're constantly taking from you but not giving anything back. And you're not acknowledging your emotions, you're not setting boundaries, you're not following your values. You are in essence betraying yourself. And when you are betraying yourself, you become very hopeless. When I started therapy, I told my therapist, all I want is to be happy. I also told her that I hated myself and didn't trust myself. So most of the work that we had to do was to work on my self-esteem and find out why did I hate myself. As I learned more about myself, how important it is to create boundaries, to understand my values, the more I was able to express myself, the less hopeless I felt. Because I started to trust myself again and started to build a relationship with myself, started to express my boundaries to others and had those boundaries respected, it completely changed my view of who I was, what would make me happy. I realized that the true key to happiness for me was to be authentically me. Ever since I have been working towards being more authentically myself, I have become happier and happier. I've learned a lot about myself as well. Hopelessness comes from a place of not respecting yourself. not listening to your own needs, and always complying with the needs of others, even at the detriment of yourself. There's only so much you can give to others. Once you've given everything, what's left? You might think, well, it's easy for you to say. I've never been hopeless. I've been hopeless for a very long time, but I never expressed that to anyone. I was just surviving day by day. I wasn't actually living. It wasn't until I started my recovery journey that I truly understood that and was able to pull myself out of that hopelessness, able to find joy in life again. I was in a very dark place at a point where I just didn't want to live anymore. When you are in that stage, when you are so hopeless that the only way you see to not suffering anymore is to end your own life, is the worst place a human being can ever be. And pulling yourself out of that place is one of the hardest things you will ever do. But it is also one of the most rewarding things that you will ever do. Because once you have been at the bottom of that pit, in that darkness, all alone, and been completely hopeless, but then had a light shone on you and shown a way out with the support of yourself and others. It is a beautiful light place outside, and you can find joy and happiness again. But it's hard work. So find that thing that keeps you hopeful and always focus on that when you are in your darkest moments. Know that you are not alone, and also know that it can and will get better. You just need to put in the work. Symptom number 6, detachment from trauma. I'm going to be frank. My entire life, I lived in complete ignorance. I had no idea that I had been traumatized. In fact, when a therapist told me I was traumatized, I scoffed at them. I was like, I'm not traumatized. People who go to war or have been assaulted are traumatized. I am not traumatized. I've not had anything like that happen to me. Let's talk about why I didn't know I was traumatized. When you are a trauma victim, your brain is looking to try and survive in that situation, but you are physically unable to protect yourself because you are just a child and you are vulnerable. So your brain has to do something in order to make the situation tolerable for you. And sometimes what your brain does is it disassociates you from the emotions of the situation. When you don't emotionally process a situation that happened, a memory, then it's almost like it gets wiped from your brain. You can't remember the memory, because if you remember the memory, then all the emotions will come flooding back and you'll get overwhelmed, and your brain sees that as life-threatening and dangerous. So your brain hides the emotions, and by hiding the emotions, it is in essence hiding the memory. When people used to ask me about my childhood, I used to always say, well, I don't know, I can't remember. I was a kid, so like, why would I remember that? Or I would just have 1 or 2 memories. And no matter how hard I tried to remember my childhood, I just couldn't. Didn't understand why, but I just kind of dismissed it because I was like, well, it was my childhood. It doesn't really matter now. It doesn't affect me now. So why should I worry about what happened in my childhood? That's already been and gone. But what I didn't realize was that even though I couldn't remember those traumatic memories, the emotions were still stuck in my body. And so anytime I was in a situation which was similar to that situation or brought up similar emotions to that situation, I would then react the same way as if I was in that first situation. It impacted my behavior, decisions I made, and impacted the way that I felt about myself and the way I treated others. Somebody once said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you recognize that you have been traumatized, then your brain can't hide it from you anymore. Everything will just come flooding back. Your brain doesn't necessarily think that you're capable of dealing with it. You don't have the tools to do that. That can be massively overwhelming, and then that in itself traumatizes you. it's so important to understand that you might not think that you're traumatized, but it doesn't mean that you aren't. When a therapist is seriously telling you you're traumatized, you really should consider it. Think to yourself, why are they saying that they think I'm traumatized? What makes them think that? You can even ask them, why are you saying trauma? What's that about? Acknowledging that it's going to be terrifying, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be okay because you are an adult now. You have the tools that you need to be able to protect and advocate for yourself. Just need somebody to guide you on how to do that. And there's nothing wrong with not knowing how to do it because you've not been taught. Just like any other thing, you can't just suddenly start speaking a foreign language. You need to learn how to speak the language before you can then speak it. You have to learn how to do maths before you can do maths. You don't magically know this information. You get taught it. And then you learn the tools of how to do it. And then you're able to do it yourself. Why should it be any different with mental health? Nobody's taught you the tools that you need to help you to deal with the situation. So how would you know how to deal with the situation? You wouldn't. So of course you're going to need somebody to help and support you in this process. That's just normal. Don't be scared to ask for help. It's going to give you a better experience. Trying to deal with trauma on your own is very hard, and you're going to be less likely to recover from it because you need support and you need tools. And the only way you're going to get those tools is if you're taught them. So you need specialists to help you with that. You need therapists, psychologists, counselors. You need family and friends. You need organizations that can help and support you. And there's nothing wrong with asking for that help. Symptom 7, loss of systems of meaning. When our entire life revolves around others and we have a lack of self-esteem and we're not honoring our boundaries or values, then it's understandable that we will lose our system of meaning. We will not know why we exist, what we were put on this planet for. What's the point? I used to ask myself throughout the years, what's the point? I used to get to moments where I was just like, what's the point? We live, we die. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't actually living. I was just surviving. That's why I had those moments where I just thought, what was the point? Because I didn't understand the value of being a human being, not a human surviving. That's a really important distinction. So that concludes our CPTSD symptoms. There are other symptoms that you can have with CPTSD, which have not been mentioned, but I wanted to just really focus on these ones because I feel that they are some of the signs and symptoms that are not as widely published or spoken about. PTSD symptoms are commonly spoken about. People know about flashbacks and triggering, but nobody really speaks about these other signs and symptoms. I really wanted to highlight them because they are very specific towards CPTSD rather than PTSD. They are really crippling and make you feel really hopeless.